Hello and welcome to the Animation Communication Podcast, for your source of discussion about animation, film, fandom, and more. So please join our host, I Love Kim Possible a Lot, or KP, and Lyle Convoy, or Lyle Manbad.
Hello everyone to this episode of Animation Communication. It's in the 90s at this point, so in case you're not familiar, I Love Kim Possible a Lot, KP for short. I have a co-host who's here sometimes, rarely. He has a 60-hour schedule, so I kind of don't push him at this point, but he's here, he's in the void. And this podcast is about like fandom and fandom culture and, you know, kind of an animation and art and a bunch of different things if you're new to it, but basically, I'm a YouTuber and I talk about this kind of stuff because I'm an animator myself, and it's interesting to educate the public and kind of talk about how to have positive relationships with your fandom in fun settings. So with me today, I have Miss Tara, who I met and stole from Fan Expo. So Tara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Tara Jabbari. I'm a digital media consultant, so I work with people on their digital presence, whether it's writing, social media, podcasting, and video. So when I was at Fan Expo, I write monthly for the Game of Nerds website and blog site, and I got a press pass. So I went to a few of the talks and panels and gave reviews and recaps of what went on. It was my first year at Fan Expo, so that was fun. And yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah. It was a fun Fan Expo, you know. A little stressful on my end, but you know, I think cons are always stressful in some regard because there's just a lot of logistical concerns.
Yeah, and you were on the first day, so it was not as hectic. Did you prefer to be there on the first day or?
Well, I was kind of just vibing because I don't know how to articulate this, but because I'm an artist at conventions too, and for those who don't familiar, I do art and I do commissions on site, and that's usually my bread and butter at conventions because the majority of the people that find me at conventions aren't familiar with the channel or the brand or anything like that. So it's more just like, what do your kids want? I can draw you like a traditional character cartoonist, but with a fandom twist, I guess, you know, but I have signs and people can take cards. So it's kind of, I've been doing this for a while. And for those unfamiliar, I was in the Brony conventions for a bit. And now like we branched out a couple of years ago to just general fandom stations. So Fan Expo Chicago this year was my first Fan Expo that I was able to get accepted for. So that was cool. But I lost my train of thought. But yeah, that's where I got my background from, is I learned how to do project management for the Brony fandom, and trial and error. I actually have a film degree and I have a studio art minor. So this has all been experience points at this rate. So yeah, I guess general for those who don't know me. But did you have any fun other conventions or panels that you went to at Fan Expo that wasn't just mine, Tara?
Yeah, no, I did, and I liked yours a lot because I'm in the back end of just a monthly writer, not even that regular, because they have weekly writers for the Game of Nerds, and the Game of Nerds has been going on for over, I think, 10 years now. I started during lockdown. No, like 2021 as when I started getting involved with them, and I think that was 8 years that they were up. But while you were explaining things like looking at HR documents to see how you want to protect yourself and have these agreements and how to deal with conflict, I was like, well, that explains the contract that they sent me, the game. Just like they said, you have to read this form. You have to have this handbook of what we accept and what we don't, you know, tolerance levels and all that stuff, the language we use, and why they have all the right to say yes or no to whatever I'm writing as they edit. And you were always saying, like, be responsive, be communicative, and be there for your team. So they're like, listen, there's like a Facebook group. And every week they're like, this is a reminder on Monday, like we're on for a new week. You need to have your stories in by Thursday or Friday. And if there's any problems, you let us know. And here's a way to schedule a time to meet with the editors every week, like clockwork. And then on Friday, they're like, remember, it's the last day to put it in for this week before we can approve. And then if there was a problem, for instance, for me, they would sometimes go and say, hey, Tara, you didn't really put the proper photo credit, right? If it was a movie poster, I have to clarify, is the movie poster from the studio or did I get it on IMDb or whatever it is? And so I was like, oh, sorry, that's always through Facebook Messenger. So it's kind of immediate and they won't put it in unless they won't publish it until we get that corrected and stuff. And as you were talking about like, oh, if you need more writers and if you need to have support, like you're not people's therapists, but you need to also know that sometimes they might need to work things out with you. And I was like, oh, this so explains how the Game of Nerds works. It just like everything started clicking for me. So I really enjoyed your talk. And then I went to a couple others. One was with Popcorn Psychology podcast. They came to talk about how therapy is perceived in film and television and good examples like even The Sixth Sense or Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
I was going to say, I think they use Rick and Morty too.
They do talk about that. I just don't watch that show, but I do remember they did.
Right.
Susan Sarandon, who was one of the guests at the Fan Expo, there's like, oh, she did a great job. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, but okay, cool.
Oh yeah, she was a guest for that episode, but anyway, it's a footnote.
Yeah, that was an example. They kind of explained. And then the usual, like, what was interesting is like Ted Lasso, they bring up as good examples and bad examples. The most popular bad example that unfortunately is used often is when the psychiatrist or psychologist or clinician has a romantic relationship with their patient. And that happens in things. And they're like, that drives us crazy. It's not how you should do it and all of that stuff. It's like a big, big no-no. And it's usually plot driven for a lot of examples when therapy is introduced. So we're like, oh, interesting. So that, and then I went to a panel about what scares horror writers. So it was, I think, the Chicago Horror Writer Association or something like that. And they had 4 horror writers come talk about what scares them, what inspires them, why did they become horror writers in the first place. And it was around the same time as Michael J. Fox was doing his meet and greets. And they're like, no one's going to come to this. And the thing for me is that as a press pass, I still have to pay for the meet and greets. I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that. So I would just go and do the panels because those are free for me.
Right.
And also I was like, what am I going to write about? I saw Michael J. Fox for 5 seconds and got a photo and he was nice. That's not going to be good for me to write a piece. So I'm there for, first and foremost, a job. So the panel was really interesting. They were talking, one of my favorite things, and all of these 3 are now live on the Game of Nerds website, but one was, they said, someone had a question, is there anything that is off limits? And that was such a good question because as writers and as creatives, we know, like, even if you do, like, if especially in horror, if there's killings or whatever, what is off limits? And basically one of the writers said, like, there is freedom of expression, but there is no freedom of consequence. So keep that in mind. And that was a great, basically an answer to sum up, is there anything that is off limits? I guess arguably no, but do not be surprised if you get backlash for whatever you did. You know, they said sometimes people who use school shootings, the writers were like, personally, I can't do that because it's too realistic. Somebody else was like, grew up very religious and hers concentrates a lot on exorcisms and things like that. For her, it's very real, but it's not something that she's not afraid to also write about, because when she writes about it, it's a form of exposure and therapy and ways to cope with what she's witnessed as a child. So it was an interesting, they're like, so it's not off limits, but you do have to be careful or expect that there will be backlash, and be sensitive to how, if you want to write about school shootings, people won't respond well, or they won't read it, or about an exorcism and all sorts of stuff. So it was a really good panel discussion.
Yeah. The Fan Expo Chicago had a really like interesting and stellar like celebrity list. So I was like Michael J. Fox and Chevy Chase, and Christopher Lloyd's line was huge, and Susan Sarandon, I think, like off the top of my head, has won an Oscar before. So, you know, that's usually you don't get that kind of talent for a just standard convention. You get mostly voice actors and then some other different people. So that's why as a YouTuber, it's been a little bit of a learning curve, I think, for conventions or influencers, is figuring out what to do with us, quote unquote, because like there's, you know, I know from my pony days, there's a market for this. Like, people want to see their favorite influencers, but sometimes conventions haven't really put that together, that influencers can be their own marketing, their own hype man too. But it's also kind of a catch-22 because they're not restricted by studios, and they're not sometimes they don't have the hottest takes, and then there's liability risks there, kind of essentially, if an influencer does something or said something before or after the con, and you're just like, oh, well, I guess we're not booking that person anymore. So I guess to touch on it lightly, because I haven't really talked about it before we go back to you, is I was doing a panel with Tara Strong for Fan Expo, and for those who haven't been paying attention on the Twitter or the thing, but she had the super TLDR, you don't have to go digging in this if you don't want to, is she liked some racist material on Twitter, and she was fired for production, and she basically misunderstood at the very best what was going on, and then blamed that on being Jewish, and everyone just lost their shit. So it's interesting to go from getting ready to meet someone on a professional level, and I gave her a picture with all her characters, and I gave her a gift basket, didn't hear anything from it. And then, not that it's about that, but, you know, like a thank you is usually like... Yeah, something like that. I spent like $50 and I did a custom painting of her and her characters. And Jodie, like, was over the moon for it, because I did one for Jodie Benson, who was Ariel. So it's like night and day working with both of them. But to basically her essentially being blacklisted, at least temporarily, from the industry, and I'm like, whoa, like, you know, and I'm just glad when things hit the fan, I was like, oh, yep, this kind of matches what my professional experience with her, because she was very, again,
so she got backlash after the Fan Expo or during?
Yes, after.
Okay, got it.
Like a three week period after. So, you know, so that's why it was kind of whiplashy for me, I guess. But it's not just generally talking about Fan Expo right now at this point, but like, and I'm keeping it on the the TLDR, because this is what the episode is about. But like, yeah, but yeah, it was interesting because she, like, again, trying to be as PC and straightforward as I can, but she was a little egotistical, and I was kind of uncomfortable because there was a lot of pressure, and she called me out for being nervous on stage and implied it was because she was very attractive, and I was just like, oh, I'm just gonna...
Okay, calm down,
yeah.
And you've been open, at least in that panel, like you had your dog there.
I didn't have my dog for the terror one, but I had the dog for the Jodie one. Jodie I don't think she even knew it wasn't really a point, but Tara did see the dog earlier, and she thought she liked the dog because I think she generally likes animals, but I didn't bring the dog to the Tara one specifically. I'm sure that would have helped if I brought the dog, but I shouldn't need my dog to read the room, I suppose. But yeah, I have a little servicey dog named Toby who's a good bean, but he went to the con and he was in cosplay, and it was fun. But anyway, yeah, it's just, again, it seemed like I expected her to be a little nicer compared to how she was when she saw the dog when she arrived, so...
Yeah.
It's just weird, you know?
Yeah. Did you meet Michael J. Fox?
I did not. I focused on Tara and Jodie and vending and my own stuff, because I think I had 1 to 2 panels a day, and that's usually... God, it was a busy schedule, to put it that way. So, back to you, because you're the guest. So, why don't we go a little bit, like, where'd you go to school? What'd you go for school for? How'd you kind of got into your little area of expertise, your little niche? So
sure. I went to Bradley University, which is in Peoria, Illinois, and I studied electronic media. And it made us sound fancier than we are. A lot of people thought we were engineers, and we're like, no, it was media production. And I think now they call it television arts, which we're like, oh no, that's a terrible...
Yeah,
major.
I mean, Like, what I've
So,
noticed, especially if you're not going to an art school, is that you kind of get broad bullshit kind of terms, like, like the one you just mentioned. I think mine was
yeah.
digital communication or something like that, which is not very specific. So it's just kind of like, here's how TV works. It doesn't really, sometimes the programs don't
Yeah.
teach you how to be good at art, like, how to write stuff. They just say, hey, here's the technicality of how the thing works, which isn't helpful. But continue, I just
Yeah,
wanted to put
this
that
one
in.
I did like Bradley's curriculum. We had the technical aspects, so I knew how to work a soundboard and a camera and editing and stuff like that. But they also required us to produce and write and direct and even be on camera. Usually it was mostly news pieces, so it wasn't fiction, more like documentary or news. So required you to have some experience in all the different facets that come to bringing some form of media out,
Mm-hmm.
screen-based media. So I really enjoyed that, and I saw that one of my strengths was more of the producing. I wanted to be a stronger writer
Mm-hmm.
and more than the technical aspect, but be there and there. And then I graduated in 2011. So that's when social media was really starting to pick up and no one really knew what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And when we graduated, a lot of us, including myself, were in charge of the social media. They're like, I don't know, there's this thing called Twitter, figure it out. Then they're like, there's something that's Instagram, and it's before Facebook bought Instagram and all sources are like, I guess it's visual, so like get photos. I don't know. And we're like, okay. So we get to figure it out. And slowly but surely it became a more and more, but YouTube really picked up all sorts of stuff. And social media and the internet was a new way of telling stories. You didn't have to,
Mm-hmm.
like, breaking news wasn't just on the television, on CNN or on regular cable. It was on Twitter, it was on YouTube, all sorts of stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
I grew from there and I really wanted to live abroad. So I applied to a few places. I got into the Peace Corps, but I also got into the, hold on. It's the Baha'i National Center Audio and Visual Unit of New Zealand.
Ooh,
And
fancy.
so, yes. So that's how I was like, what was it called? And so the Peace Corps would have sent me to Lesotho to work with children with HIV, and it had
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do with what I studied, and I didn't know how I could help them really. And also they had to disclose this. They said our Peace Corps volunteers have been robbed at gunpoint and raped. It's sort of
Oof.
like that white savior kind of complex that the locals sometimes or the gangs really didn't like and just all that stuff. So my parents were like,
Right.
absolutely not. Versus the New Zealand, they're like, you'll have a host family, they speak English, you know, all sorts of stuff. And Lesotho is like, ironically, like 10 years later, I was able to go to Lesotho while I was working for the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. It's a landlocked country within South Africa and is reported with the highest rates of HIV cases. So it was so weird that I did get there. And then we were staying at like a really nice hotel. And it was just, I was like, oh, this is the life.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an interesting thing. But so we decided in 2013, no, I'm not doing the Peace Corps. I'll go to New Zealand. So I lived in New Zealand for a year. And one of the things that led me to go for my master's was that we went to Vanuatu. There were around the world in the year 2013 from the Baha'i World Center a youth conference, an international youth conference. So 113 youth conferences all over the world was happening. So people between the ages of 15 to 30 within these communities and neighboring countries would come and say, like, okay, what does our community need and how can we help them and
Mm-hmm.
help preserve the community and help uh, progress and all that stuff. So for instance, I from the United States, and New Zealand is very similar. So I attended the New Zealand Youth Conference, and I was 25 at the time, so I was a participant at that youth conference. And it was a lot of the same things where they're like, well, we're taught, study hard, get into a good school, get a job, get married, have kids, save money, and all that. So like it's a very regimented and stuff like that. So there was something else, like, isn't there more to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then we were sent to Vanuatu. Vanuatu had 5 island countries from the South Pacific. So they had Vanuatu, New Caledonia, French Polynesian. I can't remember the other 2, but it was the 3rd highest attendees with over 1,800 youths participating from 5 countries at the Port Vila Vanuatu. And these countries, are you aware of where Vanuatu is? I wasn't.
I have no idea. Nope.
Okay, so Vanuatu is a 4-hour flight from Brisbane, Australia. So we had to fly from Auckland to Brisbane, Brisbane to Port Vila. And it's a series of like small islands, mostly 3 islands.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just in the South Pacific. And I had never really heard of it. And I checked, and it's often regarded as one of the happiest countries in the world. And there it was, and most of them spoke English, which was interesting.
Yeah.
And everyone, again, between the ages of 15 to 30. So these people came from other parts of the island by boat. And they came, it was the first time they had ever left their community, their villages and things like that. But they came to the capital and we got to interview them. And what I noticed was interesting is that they're like, well, Vanuatu and most of these islands, they're very fertile. So all you have to do, and the biggest export usually is coconut. And so they said, oh, we just have to work the farms for maybe 3 hours. The sun does the rest. The ocean, it's the Pacific Ocean, will whatever. And you're done. Maybe you go to high school. Maybe you graduate high school. Very rarely do they go past that, because when your life is so easy, like there's no, and they're like, we grow our own weed, we grow our own beer, like it doesn't matter. But also when your life is so flexible and you're just full of sun and beach and the waves and it is beautiful, they also like, what you kind of are like, what else is there? Like, we need to do something with our lives. And because they don't really go by, they're like, we don't necessarily need to like go and work for Wall Street and they typically are very healthy. Everything is very natural there. So a lot of much less health problems and stuff. So medicine isn't that much of a priority, I guess. So they were like, but we needed more. We needed more. So one thing was, more classes for children and the elderly. Like everyone needs to have some sort of classes and stuff like that. So it was like community building and getting everyone active, right? And so they also were talking about, what was it? Oh, this is what really was interesting. So we were working for the Baha'i National Center of New Zealand and Baha'i World Center, which is located in Israel. And every day we had to send all of the footage and a recap of what was going on, what was discussed, and all sorts of stuff. But the internet is not great in Vanuatu. So we are in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. When am I ever going to go back? It's been over 10 years. I still haven't gone back to Vanuatu, and we were trying so hard to like pay attention, live in the moment, but we were like climbing the mountains, or like our hosts would be like, come sit, we'll make you tea. And I'm like, in 90-degree weather, what the heck does the matter with you people? Kind of thing. But they were very relaxed. Like, it'll get done when it gets done. It'll get uploaded when it gets uploaded. Now, the Western, like the Americans, the New Zealanders, the Kiwis or whatever, we're used to fast internet, right? It drove us crazy that it was like inching so long to upload, or sometimes it wouldn't. And so we couldn't really pay attention that we're from the other side of the planet and we're having this lovely time for this week to be with these people who are so generous and so patient. So I was like, there is a digital divide. As much as it's bringing us together, where you can know what's going on in Vanuatu from America, what's going on in Ukraine or Israel at the time of recording. They're both at war. All sorts of stuff. There's still a divide where it's keeping us from connecting with each other too. So after my year at New Zealand, I decided to go to graduate school, also because it was really hard to find work. It's not the best reason to go to grad school, but I went.
If you're bored, you might as well.
I know. I was like, So I went and I got into Georgetown University for a master's in communication, culture, and
Mm-hmm.
technology. I mostly concentrated on the communication and culture aspect of it. And in that, I also learned about the term parasocial relationships. I had
Oh
never heard
yeah,
of. And
I can tell you lots about that, but
oh, I
yeah.
know. So in the fandom, so now we're getting to how I got to meet you. But basically, parasocial relationships is a one-sided relationship with the media, right? So I was
Mhm.
like, oh, this is fascinating. And I told my dad I wanted to do my thesis on it. And he's like, oh, so you want to write your biography, your autobiography? I'm like, rude. I know Ben Affleck would have married me if he knew me, like all sorts, like I know. And Angelina Jolie and I are besties. Like I just know it.
Right.
All sorts of stuff. I've never met them.
Mhm.
So, but it was an interesting thing to kind of understand like why we become so invested in it.
Right.
And so I got really into that. So it actually didn't become my thesis. I had to use it as an independent study,
Mhm.
but that's what I focused on. If I went for my PhD, I would have wanted to continue with parasocial relationships, but mostly with this new form of media makers known as influencers, because that's
Mhm.
really different. How much of you are the product, right? Musicians, before there was Taylor Swift, there was Cher. And before there was Cher, there was Beethoven. Like there always was like a huge fandom around musicians,
Mhm.
actors, William Shakespeare or writers, Jane Austen, all the way to today. There was
Mhm.
always those artistic sports athletes. I didn't touch athletes because that's a whole other thing,
Oh,
right?
right, for sure.
But influencers are quite unique in their own thing
Mhm.
because you are the product. How much of yourself do you want to share? How much of it? So, anyway, I decided not to go for my PhD, but I still had this interest in parasocial relationships. And I went and I presented. My independent study was saying that we need to update parasocial relationships. It started in the
Mhm.
1950s and it hasn't really been updated for the digital age. It's basically if you sent something to the fandom, the
Mhm.
media, then it's no longer parasocial, right? So
Mhm.
if you tweet to Taylor Swift or if you comment on her or even like her photos on Instagram or something, under the
Mhm.
definition of parasocial relationship, it's no longer parasocial. My argument is it still is because it's only one-sided.
Right.
If they respond to you, if they like your tweet, if they respond to your comment, then it's no longer a parasocial relationship. It's not a friendship by any
Mhm.
means, but it's no longer just one sided because they have, or their assistant has, you know, there's a great example of my friend and I were at a conference and she and I had our nails done. So we did held our hands and I took a photo and I'd be like, oh, I love
Mhm.
our manicures. And then I was like, you know what this looks like? It's like when Travis Barker and Kourtney Kardashian confirms that they were together. So I found
Mhm.
the photo and I shared it. And it's been years that they had that photo up and stuff. So I really had to scroll. I was really invested in this whole stupid
Mhm.
Instagram story. So I go and I find it and I share it and I'd be like, doesn't this look familiar? And I show our photo. Then later on, I was with her and we're at a conference. Thankfully, it wasn't during a session or something, but I was
Mhm.
like, "Oh my God, Nikki, Kourtney Kardashian Barker has seen my story." And I was like, either that or more likely it's one of her assistants, but still, like it says it with the check mark and everything. I was like, freaking A, man. This is awesome. So, under my definition, I would say it's no longer parasocial. But
Mhm.
what does this mean, especially with influencers? Because they're not necessarily Kourtney Kardashian level, it's sort of all sorts of influencers that you get to know their daily lives, but they know nothing about you. It's kind of weird. So,
Mhm.
I didn't go for my PhD, but I still am curious about it. And I presented at AwesomeCon in Washington, D.C. I've applied to a few other conventions, but then COVID came. And so it,
Mhm.
it kind of went to the back end. And then I started writing for the Game of Nerds, I went to be on their podcast to talk about parasocial relationships, since that was my independent study at grad school. And then they Game of Nerds asked me to write for them, and I do partially about parasocial relationships and partially reviews of movies. I get screenings. I got to go to like Tribeca Film Festival with a press pass, or the Chicago International Film Festival, or the different conventions. So it's between those two. And so that's my story, and I still get to it. So that's
I was gonna say there's tons of points I could branch off, but I just figured you finish. But like, I guess, yeah, I didn't know that, but that's interesting as far as parasocial relationships, because it's something I've personally had to keep an eye out for pretty early on, because people, I've been doing this for 10 years for people who don't know, but like, I also have a nonprofit production team, and, there's factors that I didn't really anticipate being factors because of my just not knowing any better, but like me being a woman's on the internet, and me kind of being the funny man, too. People, especially in the brony culture, not everyone, obviously, because there's not really a majority, but a lot of people pretended they or thought they knew me, and then when they saw something that in their mind contradicted what they thought was the thing, with my PTSD timey fun times, it was interesting to see, and not, I mean, it wasn't fun, obviously, but it was kind of like, that's why it was so, traumatizing. I'm pretty okay talking about it now, but like, that's why it was so interesting, because it was a lot of people having outrage with not really even knowing me not really making a direct statement, except like just apologizing for the people that felt so hurt, kind of thing. So, and I realize now a lot of it was due to parasocial relationships. And, as an, I guess, influencer, YouTuber person, lady myself, like, I mean, that's why, we have the Discord fan server, is just so I can have a positive influence with people that like my content with still feeling safe, because, like, it was things I didn't really think about getting into the game, as far as now are absolute factors, as far as people secretly recording me, as far as people secretly, taking my screenshots and sharing them out of context, because, I'm like, kind of say it as I is, but like, sarcasm in general can be misread via text. It happens all the time. So, and it's also, people get vindictive if they get called out for their shit. Like, recently we've been calling out more people that, are not objectively great people for, really obvious reasons, like, and we releasing the safety reports in the fan server, just like, hey, this was someone in our server and he turned out to be a keep an eye out kind of thing. Here's all the logs of the proof. And I've found that a couple of people are getting mad about that, and just like, you're going after me because I'm a small creator. I'm like, no, I'm going after you because you objectively did like a bunch of things really up and wrong, and like the public needs to know. So it's just a weird kind of arc that I've had, going from My Little Pony YouTuber to kind of like, the slammer down of the mallet, the moral mallet, I suppose, because, but I've also been on the other end, because, I wish people were this to me when I needed it, because the bronies, I say this with love, but there's a lot of autism in relation to bronies and people that consume a lot of cartoons specifically, but media generally, and just bad reads as far as me, my character, and as well as I present myself as an exaggeration of my personality, but it's pretty much like, so my personality, like, I make jokes constantly at my own, at my own expense, and I'm fine, that's just who I am. But because of, I wasn't an actor, I wasn't playing a role, I was just playing myself, but exaggerated as a pony, or now exaggerated as a person, as a cartoon person on your screen. It's just been, it's been interesting to see how people, like, I've had people, like, look up my real full legal name and think it's appropriate to tell me that in public. I've had people ask for my phone number in public with their mom present, and their mom has to be like, okay, Junior, like, maybe that's not the best time. So, like, I like having, and, like, I love going to conventions. It's nice to see the physical presence of people there, but with the same token, it's a good way to interact with people in person that, I don't know how to phrase this, but it's a good way to interact with people without whatever the walls, I guess, because police, like, generally aren't going to help you feel safe, and especially conventions have a bunch of security staff. So I guess it's the lesson that I've had to learn is to be careful in all my spaces. Like, I'm constantly online, especially now as we're kind of a little behind in the regular content. So, but being careful what I say, using a lot of I feel statements just so people, if there's some kind of conflict, don't feel attacked, because if they feel attacked, then they're gonna make emotional decisions at my expense or other people around me's expense. And, usually I try to use my influence positively, but on the other spectrum, there's other people on the end that, just because you're an influencer or a YouTuber or a podcaster doesn't morally make you a just person, just period. Like, anyone can have that if they bother to learn how to do that kind of stuff. And there's kind of a blindness of like, oh, the influencer is good when I was like 15 and now I'm 20 or whatever. And there's also a risk there because it's like you've tricked yourself to knowing this person, even though you know what they present to the world and not really like the real them, if that makes sense. So
yeah, no, that's so true. And it's a very odd thing. When I started interviewing influencers for my own research about parasocial relationships, they're like, it is weird because I don't call them my fans. And even some influencers that I've reached out to that I've followed for years, and if they don't respond, I feel like I kind of take it personally. I'm like, oh, what? Mm-hmm. Like, you're Kim Kardashian? You can't get back to my email?
Right.
But you also are like, whatever. It's a bizarre way of a friendship. I think in my paper that I said, someone quoted it, it's not a friendship, it's not a work relationship, it's something sort of in between, and it has never happened before because it's solely through the internet. Mm-hmm. We never really had the internet at this capacity before, so we're figuring things out, just as we were figuring out how to use Twitter or how to use Instagram and how to use all sorts of different things. I remember they were like, I don't know, should we say the president of Bradley University is drinking tea? Like, what is Twitter for? And then we finally, slowly but surely, there was a way to be like, oh, no, this is for this next event. This is what an alumni did. Like, you figure it out. But in the beginning, they really didn't know what to do with it. And because we were in the communications department, they were like, figure it out. And we're like, I didn't invent the thing. So, and so, like, I remember there's a really meme. They're like, Instagram is down, describe me your food. Because for a long time, people would just show their meals, like the dish.
Oh, God. Yeah, this was before my time. So this is like interesting.
This is before restaurants. Like, now you'll see restaurants, depending on if it's really popular, they actually have icons on the menus that say, like, this is Instagram worthy because they make it really pretty or something. And I'm like, what the hell is this? But before, people are like, okay, having chicken soup, hashtag chicken soup for the soul, something like that. We're like, I don't know what the hashtag is for. And people are figuring it out. The way that we're forming relationships online is also new. So it's nice to hear that, like, parents kind of tell people now is not a time to ask KP for her number, or like, you just don't need to know that. Because as I was researching and doing a lot of more famous, like, I remember, what was it? The one from the female who was in High School Musical, Vanessa Hudgens.
Oh yeah, that's Vanessa Hudgens, yeah.
I think it was her. She was saying, like, she was at an airport, she was running late, she was trying to find it, and this lady was like with her daughter. She's like, you owe me an autograph and a photo with my daughter because I paid for basically, having
seeing your movie
so many times and I'm going to miss my flight. And they're like, no, you owe us. And I'm like, this is an adult at an airport, which is already stressful, and you're with a child. Like, read the room that it's not appropriate time, right? Whereas it's like when my dad met, now I forget her name. She is so famous, and she was in Jumanji. She was the older woman, like older.
Aquafina, maybe?
No,
Aquafina was in Jumanji 2 or something. Oh, yeah, I don't know that off the top of my head, so.
Robin Williams. Oh, shoot. She's so good. Oh, this is going to bug me. Bonnie Hunt, I think is her name.
Okay.
Bonnie Hunt. You know what? We're going to check on this because this is disrespectful. She's awesome. Yes, it's Bonnie Hunt. Bonnie
Okay.
Hunt was it. So my dad had been upgraded to first class on a flight. I think it was like from Chicago to Los Angeles. And I was supposed to be on the flight with him, but he traveled a lot for work. So I was stuck in coach first class. And lo and behold, Bonnie Hunt was on the flight with us. And so he went when everything was like calm, like we went in. He's like, "Excuse me, my daughter is stuck in coach. Would you mind giving her an autograph? She really likes you," and all that stuff. And so she laughed and she's like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And so she did. And then when we landed, he met up with me because obviously he got out first. And he's like, "This is Bonnie Hunt's autograph." I'm like, "What? This is so rude. You should have like switched places with me." All that stuff. But
Dad,
anyway.
you owe me.
I know. Oh, wait until he got Bernie Mac's autograph one time. I was so mad he lost. He like left it at the hotel. I was so mad at him when he came back from a business trip. He was like filming Ocean's 13, I think, at the time too, or Ocean's 11, 12. So anyway, so it was an interesting. Like he knew, hey, first of all, they might have a fear of flying. They might just want to sleep. It's a 4-hour flight. It's whatever. I'm fully prepared for no. Also, he knew the social norms of wait, everyone's boarding. The flight attendants need to make sure everyone is properly in their seatbelt. We have to take off. Then the seatbelt thing has to come off. All sorts of stuff. And then you have 4 hours basically to get to Bonnie Hunt. And if she says no, deal with it. Like, he had those social cues and we're forgetting those because a lot of things are so immediate. Right now, I was like, what was her name? Oh my God, this is driving me crazy. I just found it, right? Bonnie Hunt. If this was before the internet age, we would just have to freaking deal with it. I'm like, it started with a B. And you're like, Becky, Bailey. I'm like, I don't know. And
there's always that rumor that I think of that I'm pretty sure is true, but like when Bill Murray would be on sets, he'd just go up to a random person if they were eating like French fries or something and steal a French fry and just eat. He said, no one will ever believe you, and just walks away.
Yes, I've heard this story so much. And now, I think there's a documentary about like how Bill Murray will just party crash. And people started now with phones, camera phones, they have footage. And now people can believe them. They're like, I'm telling you, Bill Murray crashed our wedding and took a fry. They're like, no. Now there's footage and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
we caught the wild Bill Murray.
Yes. It's like a Loch Ness monster or something, but it's so good. And I liked it. And then they're like, it kind of ruins it for people to have that kind of fun. And like, it's our little secret, but
winky
really
wink
isn't. Yeah. And so it's an interesting thing. And that was one of the things that I was also studying and kind of helping with a professor at Georgetown called presence theory, which is about how we keep our presence. There's so many ways to be in contact and to be contacted that we have general distractions. And how much do you give your full attention? And I went back to why I went to grad school in the first place, which was when I was trying to be present with our host family in Vanuatu. And they're like, it'll load when it'll load, kind of thing. Like, how's your day? Like, what did you guys learn? Because our host families were older, so they weren't really at the conference. But also they're like, oh, you come from the States and where in the States? I've never been there. All that and all I could think of is this isn't loading, So budgeting our presence. I know, is it Dave Chappelle, I think, for his comedies, he requires all phones to be put away before you enter the theater or to your seat, because he's like, I don't want any recordings. I'm still working on the joke. And 2, I really want people to be paying attention and stuff like that. So it's an interesting thing. And I think not Sex and the City, but in just that in the most recent season 2, Miranda goes to a taping and she hides her phone like in her crotch or something because her son is in distress and she just wants to be in contact with him. But and then of course it rings at the worst time possible during a live recording. And so I was like, woman, you can't put it on vibrate. It's in your for crying out loud. It's fine. Like, you'll feel it, but wouldn't need to disrupt the whole thing. It's a stupid plot. The show's not great in general.
Yeah. I didn't even know the logistics of what you just said, but I believe you when that episode exists. Yeah.
Yeah, so like it shows you like why they still are like everyone is however many times you say please put your phone on silent, people will always forget. So like just put your phone away. We'll lock it up. It's safely with the guards. After the performance, you can get it back. What if you're in a family emergency like the character was? And of course, then the bitch forgets to turn it off to make it vibrate or something like that. And also, like, so it showed the plus sides of putting your phone away and the downsides because she was worried about her son and wanted to be in contact with him 24/7. So it was an interesting thing for me for having studied it. I was like, yeah, I remember in school, they said in college in particular, this is like 2007 or so to 2011. I don't know. I'm horrible with math. But so they said, okay, one person can have their phone on their desk. Everyone else has to put it away in case there is a campus emergency. Even the teacher's like, I will not put my phone on like it's not even in my pocket. It's inside my desk so I'm not distracted. All that stuff. Because unfortunately there are things like campus shootings or if there was a tornado or if there was whatever, so we would get a text alert before the siren came on or something like that. That was acceptable. And everyone wanted their phone to be the one to be allowed. He's like, nope, we'll give it to this person. And that was one of the protocols. Is my understanding it's no longer like that, but it was an interesting way. Or, our teachers would come and say, listen, there is a family sort of emergency. My kid is in the hospital. I apologize if my phone comes off. I really need to have my phone with me at all times and not on silent because I'm expecting a call from the hospital. Something like that. So there was this open communication. It is odd also now. Then I went into the workforce and my bosses, we were trained, you put your phone at your desk when you get to the conference table. You don't need your phone. If you need it, you put it on silent or on vibrate, right? But my boss never had it that. He would always have the ring on and it would be the most random thing. Like his kid is like, do we have peanut butter at the house or should I go to the grocery? Like something silly like that. I was like, why doesn't he have it up? Because he's never been taught to put it away or taught. It's a new technology. He is like 30 years older than me and he's been in this workforce for a lot longer. And the cell phone came out 10 years ago, so or less than. So this idea that his kid can communicate with him 24/7 is new and he doesn't know the protocol. I do because I've been taught. It's quite interesting. And the more I did my research for presence theory, the younger generation, so not the millennials, but ones after millennials and younger even, have a comfort of actually not having their devices with them, their smart devices. They're kind of like the break versus millennials and a little older. It's a scarier thought because we got used to it. And then baby boomers and older are practically forget about their devices. They're like, oh, I forgot my cell phone and we're going to go on vacation for a week. Oh, well,
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing of the generational aspects of it. There is a theory that the next few generations will not be so obsessed with taking selfies or taking photos in general, because our generation, or right now, everything can be photographed, that there's just an overload. You're like, can't I just keep it mental, kind of thing. So they're going to appreciate it. It's sort of, really exaggerated example, but I think it still works, is families whose family are chain smokers. There's a lot of the people that I know who have parents who were chain smokers really did not smoke. They were like, I'm sick and tired of the smell. I'm sick and tired of like always only having one hand, or you can't really talk because you have the cigarette in your mouth and all that stuff. She's like, no, I just don't want it, because they saw all the frustrations of having it so much. The other aspect is that it's so common that they just are used to the smoke, and so they become smokers themselves. So there's either or of the extremes. I think it's now that with our smart devices and taking photos or having your memory, like understanding like you don't need to know Bonnie Hunt's name right now, kind of thing. So
Right. Yeah. Interesting for me to see too, I suppose, because like as a millennial myself, I guess as a traditionally millennial person, there seemed to be like a rite of passage almost in getting your first cell phone or getting your first even your first iPod back in the day. And because of that kind of extreme excitement was matched with using it as much as possible, versus now it's kind of, more just universal. That's not really something that's such behind such a paywall, such a like a privilege. I remember like when people were generally getting iPods, it was like middle school age, and then the next generation was getting them like and elementary school. I'm just like, what is an elementary schooler need an iPad? But that's kind of like, there becomes less of a gate or a wall behind, improving technology. But that's how it's kind of been for just general human history, is as the older generations get access to things and pass it down to the younger kind of get used to it and take it for granted, and then generally how the standard of living goes up. So it's interesting though to see it in a media aspect and kind of compare notes as far as generational trends, I suppose, that are coming out.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess to talk about more of the digital marketing side, so like kind of if you want to break down kind of like how you got into that specifically a little bit in more detail, as well as like, like maybe kind of the breakdown of how your people kind of work on stories and how they send it off, because I imagine you have to send them off to agencies and reps to be approved. Like, what is that process like as well?
So the market, it depends. I work with a lot of nonprofits and NGOs, because I now am more location independent. So I travel a lot. I'm more of a nomad. But I had most of my clients from Washington, D.C., which has a lot of government stuff. But I tend to work more in the
So I've heard.
Right, as you know. And the marketing things is just to make sure you have everything. So for nonprofits, it's really important that we always credit our funders, right? So actually, an interesting thing, we had a speaker at Georgetown in a class I was taking at school that was a guy who started a private company, and he worked for the government. It was when ISIS, the terrorist group.
Oh, gotcha.
Not the goddess. But what is it? Islamic something, or I can't remember. Anyway, remember this like in 2016 or so. They were really recruiting, and they were really, really influential online, ISIS, the terrorist groups. In particular, they would get a lot of young women in America to drop everything and leave their home and their home country and move to, I think it's like Lebanon and other parts of the Middle East that ISIS really worked on. Now, this individual, he worked for the CIA. He worked, he's special ops, all sorts of stuff. And he's like, if they ever wanted to get back, he's like, the best way defense online is to make fun of them, because it makes them angry. And when you're angry, you're going to make mistakes. Right. So at the time, Saturday Night Live with Dakota Johnson.
What year is this?
This is probably 2016, I think.
Okay.
Dakota Johnson is a 50 Shades of Grey girl, right? Yeah. So she was a host on Saturday Night Live. And Saturday Night Live had a skit where it looks like she's being dropped off to go to college, right? So she and her dad, and he's like, I'm really proud of you, and I'll miss you at home. She's like, Dad, I really have to do this. I need to like leave my bubble and all sorts of stuff. And then he's like, yeah. And then it turns out she's going to go join ISIS. and they have the other actors pretend to be ISIS with the guns and the beards and all sorts of stuff and the turbans and all things like that. So it's a joke because it was happening a lot, and we're kind of studying it too. And things like, and it goes back to like what I had discovered at the youth conferences is like when young people want a purpose, they want to have more than just go work at the farm. When you're done, that's it. Or go do school, go work. That's all you have. Wanted more. Am I doing it all for? Right. So ISIS figured out that. And then they were like, you're doing Allah's work and all that stuff. Allah being Arabic for God and all sorts of stuff. So it was an interesting thing. So this man, I don't remember his name, but he was saying basically SNL did a good job, and they can do that because they don't have to get permission from their bosses. Their boss is Lauren Michaels and his boss is NBC, and NBC is like, whatever, it's creative, it's creativity. We have creative license to do it, right? He's like, for us, if we wanted to use Twitter or something like that to do any kind of response towards ISIS or anybody, honestly, North Korea or South Korea, it doesn't matter. He's like, if I write a tweet, I would have to give it to my boss, who would have to give it to the head of the CIA, who would have to go talk to the White House, which would have to get permission from the president. The president doesn't have the final say, though. The president has to talk to their advisors and all sorts of. Then it comes all the way down back to me and they say, okay, you can approve it. Or no, you need a comma. When you put the comma, send it back to us. Twitter doesn't have time for this crap. It's immediate, right? He's like, so we're behind fighting ISIS as a official government entity. The CIA's Instagram or the CIA's Twitter or something cannot do that. But a private company, which he had started, is allowed to do it. SNL is allowed to do that. So he's like, so that's the frustrations of sometimes having those digital marketing things. And I just was at a workshop yesterday on branding, and this man was working. Is this answering your question, by the way?
It's interesting. So you're good. Keep on.
Okay. So, because you were
don't
saying,
worry,
like,
don't worry. I'll stop you if I'm just like, okay, so I don't know what this is about.
Yeah. So, but going back to like the branding and figuring out the voice, they said man was a speaker and he is an independent, he's a contractor, and one of his clients was Champion, the athletic department, like the athletic store. And he was sharing with us a couple of examples of just, you want to engage with people. And that means commenting on other content, not just always spewing out your own content. And he was like, these comments that I made that took me literally 30 seconds to find, write, and send got 400 likes, 40,000 likes on some of these things, all sorts of stuff. Like, he's like, there was one photo of Kim Kardashian wearing Champion sweatshirt. So in the comment, he's like, you're doing great, sweetie. Keep wearing Champions, which is a callback to a famous line from Keeping Up with the Kardashians, where she was posing for Playboy and her mother would say, you're doing great, sweetie. So he used that kind of common like meme or memory from the show and just used that for Champions. And then we were like, were you allowed to do that? Champion let you have free reign? And he's like, no, they did not. I was like, I just took a chance and I just did it. And I'm like, you could fire me, but it's getting the job done. Kind of thing. We're like, oh, dang. Okay. And he's like, and I didn't get fired. The contract ended and stuff, and they liked what I did, but we decided to move on. But he's also like, I took a chance, because you can't keep waiting. Like, is this clever? Is this appropriate? Is this, you want to get engaged. And the more he found that the less he thought about it, got more attention anyway. Now, I would also say there's a risk about it, right? There's certain things. I remember John Oliver, the Late Night with John Oliver, was talking about how brands really don't need to participate on a lot of all these different observance days. And he used, I think it was a memorial for the September 11th, 2001 attacks. It's been however many years later. And he's like, it's weird when brands like Pizza Hut or whatever kind of talk about it. And he's like, this is one from Fleshlight, the sex toy, had participated and say, like, never forget, hashtag never forget. And they're like, why does Fleshlight need to talk about 9/11 kind of thing? So there's these arguments. That's why I kind of like that I work with nonprofits, because the majority of the time, going back to what I thought your question was, is to...
It's cool, we're having a good time.
That's good. Is bringing awareness to an organization's work and crediting those who've helped us. For instance, one is in food systems to help end hunger, specifically hidden hunger, which is a term I can explain later. And so some of our funders are like the government of Canada, And the Gates Foundation, they give us a lot of funding. So I also have to figure out how to fit that in 140 characters or less. Now with X, you can pay to have more room, but we are a nonprofit and an NGO. Like, there's no money, so we're not paying for that. So just like getting, should I say, thank you for, and using, instead of FOR, just use the number 4, but that's not very professional. So what should I, there's all those little things, make it a thread, make it, whatever. So there's all those kind of challenges that are kind of interesting, and it differs. With one client, the manager had changed twice, and one did not mind when the word and was used as the symbol, so that I could save 3 characters, or at least 2 characters. The other one is a more of a academic person, and then she's like, I don't think that's professional looking. And I was like, okay, so then I can't really do all of these unless I make them multiple tweets, and then I'm like, then they'll get lost to which link they need to.
Right.
Let me think about this. So like you work with people in that capacity and try to please them. But
yeah, and that can be very subjective, I'm sure, depending on who's there. And like, the other, I guess from my perspective too, it gets tricky because like, to kind of wrap around what you said earlier, the traditional like actor or actress or social media person has to prove their worth beforehand and is at the mercy of, like, at least when they're first starting out, like usually 1 or 2 major studios, and that's kind of how the Disney Channel kids kind of rise through the rank, is because they're working with Disney, and Disney gives them the exposure, and then they choose what to do with it after, I suppose, if they, whatever. That's long history of use and abuse there. But I guess unfortunate thing is influencers have to kind of learn that stuff, like, as they're going, depending on how their brand is going. And I don't know, I guess it can be tricky sometimes because you kind of have to learn to trust people, but also be careful about having your own back and being careful about, like, who might be over your shoulder and who might be trying to befriend you for the wrong reasons, like, for whatever. Because that's happened to me multiple times, and it's just kind of like, oh, okay, so they didn't want to, like, work with me for X, Y, and Z. They wanted to work with me because they had a crush on me. They needed the social validation of being around me, which is kind of weird because I don't really take myself too seriously. So to have someone else have it in their head that, like, I'm important than more than just, like, someone who does YouTube content is really kind of, I guess it's a compliment, but also kind of like a weird amalgamation in my head because I just don't see myself that important besides just I make cartoon videos about cartoons sometimes. So it's an interesting, it's hard for me to wrap my head around people who do it on a more like casual basis, or like, because we always put a lot of, I feel we put a lot of effort into the content, and we put a lot more effort than those videos need just to get out my general opinions about specific things. So there's also kind of like, you have this situation that's going on YouTube now with the Sniper Fox girl, or Rifle, I don't know, a YouTuber who basically doxed someone that she wasn't on good terms with on the platform itself. And YouTube is kind of giving her a slap on the wrist saying, oh, well, you lose monetization for a week, and then everyone else is like, she committed a crime. Like, what is there to discuss? But like previously, from my understanding, she was a gamer YouTuber who didn't actually game and stole other people's footage to use in her videos, which is kind of like morally not cool. And then there's the other also construct of, like, sometimes women on the internet can get away with things for a longer period of time than if they were men, which is kind of like this Tara Strong situation, kind of like her situation. So it's kind of it's a weird time for just kind of developing media and stuff. Like, I think the internet in general is a net good because it helps people learn faster, and it gives access to learning for people who maybe can't afford it otherwise, logistically or financially. But at the same time, you create kind of these people that, shouldn't be using it as much as they are for whatever reason, escapism or influence or power, whatever. And those people kind of have to wait for them to mess up so bad and go away or learn their lesson. And it's weird to see real people character arcs sometimes on Twitter.
Yeah, well, I also taught like internet safety for kids and high school and elementary school, all that stuff. anyone really under the age of 18. And what was asked, like, oh, do you think we're better off or worse off with the internet? And I always use this example. Exactly. I'd say overall, better off because schools don't get funded a lot. I had a friend whose school book, history book, was talking about the Cold War, like the fear of the Cold War. And we're like, okay, that was a while ago. So, but you have the internet to have the most up to date things that are going on. So all that stuff. If you have a learning disability or something like that, there are a lot more tools you can find out more about. You can find a community. It's a huge community for people who are, you know, LGBTQ plus who might not feel comfortable in their real life community. Find a community online, all sorts of stuff. But equate the internet, particularly to something like the car. When the car was first started, there were no real laws. There was no stop signs. There was no seatbelts, nothing. Did it get you to work faster and then get you back home faster? Yes. To be with your families. Did you get to the hospital faster? Yes. But lots and lots and lots of deaths have happened, lots and lots of accidents, people went paralyzed or whatever it was. So then they were like, oh, maybe we should have street signs. Maybe we should have stoplights and stop signs and all sorts of. Then seat belts, and maybe, oh, you know what, maybe children shouldn't be sitting in the front seat, anyone under the age of, I think it's 10 needs, I don't even know, but either way. And then they were like, oh, babies need their own kind of baby seat. And then people were still drinking and driving. They're like, oh, nope, that can't be good. They didn't know any better, and then they realized it wasn't good, so there was a law, right? Then it was texting and driving was a huge thing. Then it was all sorts of, so we need to have hands-free. Our cars also adapted, as well as our laws adapted to how the cars and technology, right? So the internet right now, I think, we don't even have seatbelts. It's up to you, the individual, to put on the seatbelt or, to be wiser about your decisions. And that's a lot.
Right.
The law will always be behind. So if you expect children to be protected, they're not online. So you have to educate your children and think of what is okay to share. Do you want your kids' face online or not? Do you want, if they're going to show them doing some sort of choreography outside in the backyard, well, does it show any street signs to give away your location? All sorts of, like, think about these things. And then it's also just having that balance. You don't need to be obsessed with the technology or to find out so-and-so's name right away. Like, realize, like, what should be prioritized? What should have your attention and your presence at this moment? We're at a family dinner. We do not need to be distracted. We do not need the TV on, or we don't need music on right now. Let's just talk, kind of thing. No one's telling you to do this. You have to do it to yourself. Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, I think it's, like, to your other point, too, I think it's interesting to note that, like, I don't know how to articulate it, but, like, it's been such a big influence on the millennial generation, and parents just kind of assume that that was a positive influence, at least from my perspective. Seeing a lot of kids with their parents, and, like, conventions, like, have always kind of been around since the 80s with, like, Star Trek conventions, but I'd say in the last, like, 10 years, they're slowly becoming more, not family affairs, but just, like, they're more open to that family, and they try to advertise to families specifically because, because I remember I wasn't really going to conventions in high school, and that was kind of, like, in more of an adult thing, and they cost money, and that might be problematic. So I think especially smaller conventions have done a real good marketing move to market to families, because if you don't have to travel and you have something going on downtown to do something, and if it's like $30 to $50 to get in, they have someone that people might be interested in, then there's kind of like, oh, it's something to do kind of thing, similar to like a traveling comic kind of doing shows just around the culture kind of thing. So but at the same time, there's also been like issues with people making friends on the internet, for better for worse. And like, from the Brony days, what we would do is we'd meet, like, the people that grew up in that culture would people at conventions for their first time. And then once we established that hey, they, I didn't get robbed or anything, then it was good, I guess. I don't know. Like it's been weird for me because I was a popular girl in that community. Like they used to call it horse famous was the term, so I had to be especially careful. But at the same time, it was I don't know, not interesting, but like it was a risk like anything else to room with people you've only met online, but it seemed like it was a more accepted risk for like, you know, like college kids compared to like, you know, like people in high school, or because high schoolers wanted to go to these events too, but I'm like, I mean, if your mom's here, you know, like I wouldn't advise just going on your own because you don't really know what you're getting into, and especially a lot of the old guard bronies are turning out to be not great people. Not all of them, but like a couple of content creators in my field in my day have turned out to not be great people. I'm not, you know, not speaking to anyone specific. There is like, you know, a guy, I think 2018, who turned out to be creeping on children, and that kind of is sometimes a theme when you don't have those communities unchecked. But like from my experience with the bronies, they were so afraid to put lights on that to draw attention to the bad people because they didn't want to all be grouped as the bad people. But at the end of the day, that was kind of a disservice to the public and selfish as a general concept. So I think it's getting more better, or as far as, you know, I think Discord is a much more convenient tool, hence why I use it all the time. But at the same token, you know, parents should knowing what their kids are consuming on the internet. Like I cursed in my videos, like I always have. And like it just makes me uncomfortable to think that if, you know, a parent didn't paying attention to what their children are watching on the internet and I curse, and that's how children learn bad words is through the blue horse on the internet, then that creates a lot of different issues. And, you know, I think about that sometimes and I'm like, oh no, did I teach a whole generation to curse from the internet?
Yeah.
So
that's a lot. But yeah. And it's just, and it's a lot, but schools don't have the capacity to teach. You have to do it yourself.
Yeah, and that's very fair. And, you know, sometimes people or parents specifically just don't have the time for it. And, you know, that's fair, but, you know, it's kind of in a gray area because then it's kind of like, you know, your kids learning how to use their cell phones before you do. Like, you can't, it's hard for you to deny them that tool if they use that to connect to their friends, but you don't really know what they're doing on that cell phone kind of thing. So, as an example. But I was gonna say I don't think I have any more questions off the top of my head. Do you have any questions or any like discussion points you want to bring up? I think we got about 10 minutes on the clock, or you know, but I can go past if you'd like. So
no, I mean basically moral of the story is be aware of your emotions, and you know, remember no one owes you like a selfie. And I guess there's like little tips of having those digital balances. And also when you post online, I always tell them like, okay, the internet is forever, right? There is actually no law right now that allows Twitter or X, Instagram or whatever to delete whatever you posted, right? So I was like, so when you want to say something, I say compose what you want to say and then leave it for a while, an hour, overnight, and go back to it. Do you still want to post that? Because if it's still relevant to you and you still feel those ways, or maybe you swore a lot and you don't want to necessarily swear that much online because it'll be coming back to you and all sorts of stuff, or it's just a bad habit, even if you use a fake username or something like that. I think so. That's one of the things I always teach the kids. And then just because it will always be there, right? So if it matters, if it's right now or an hour from now or a day from now or a week from now, it can wait to be posted. Like cool off, see how you feel about it now. Do you still want to post it? Then the other thing is to also have a time, like people bring their devices to the bathroom. Like, well, if you need to take a poo, bring a book, you know?
Oh yeah, I
you know, like my friend is a very germophobic and she hates it when people bring their phones in the bathroom. And sometimes I do. So I just tease her and stuff, would be like sending you a text, guess where I am. She's like, you better not be on the shitter and all that stuff kind of thing. But it is true. Like we're so, or like I remember when it started counting your steps and I went to the bathroom and I left my phone my desk. I'm like, well, that was a waste of like 10 steps to count to my 10,000 goals kind of thing. You need to also not need to have it all the time. There's watches now and all sorts of stuff, but having that digital thing, because our memories have gone bad. I can never really had a good sense of direction. But how many phone numbers do you have memorized? Probably not a lot. But if you talk to a baby boomer and older, they probably still know quite a few phone numbers because they had to, right? We don't know my best friend's phone number. I was on the shitter and I needed to text her and I didn't have my contacts or something like that. I'd be like, oh, well, I'm going to have to wait until I'm like washed hands and everything. Like, and then what's the point of that? That's no joke for her. That's no tease. But it's those kinds of things of also allowing our brains to be, away from technology too. So those are my top things is you don't need to post right away and also have a break from technology too.
Yeah, I think that's a good mind frame, because especially to bring it back to parasocial relationships, sometimes people, if they don't get the response that they want to hear in their head as far as being best friends with Brad Pitt or whoever, then they might say something that is emotionally toned but, comes off as aggressive, like insults and, calling people bad names. And, like your mythological celebrities, your Taylor Swifts don't really owe you as a person anything, because they're so busy because they have to appease a million people all the time, and they have to watch how they act on social media, because if they say like one or two things out of line, then, it could turn into a for them. So sometimes, usually, like, the busier the people are, in my experience, the less communicative they are on Twitter or whatever, because they gatekeeped back just for their own protection, which I get. But, like, my just general advice is people just gotta not take that stuff so personally. Like, just because you don't owe any specific person anything, even if you've consumed their product or their time, like, from my experience, too. And so, like, traditional celebrities, when you want to book them, you go to IMDb and you professionally book them via IMDb Pro by contacting their agency from there. In my experience, that's generally how it's done, from my understanding. And, like, the general public doesn't really know that, and they just assume the people who run the Twitter are actual people, and they're not just, again, the assistants who are just keeping up with their Twitter, so their fans feel like they're being seen or whatever, to kind of keep it going, I suppose. But each person is also different, and, like, I've been in situations where people feel insulted because I call them a fan, or I don't take DMs with just random fans kind of thing. And that's a derogatory term, when it's just kind of like, hey, I don't really know you. So it can be like kind of a bed of knives if you don't know what you're expecting. And that's kind of how it's been in my experience, because I always kind of been the funny man. That was always my shtick. So people just kind of, and humor has a way of resonating with people for better or for worse. And so I'd feel like a lot of people pretended they thought they knew me when they didn't know me, just because they consumed my content and they just assumed I was I am exactly the person in the video and I could never do any wrong, and I'm not even a person anymore. I'm just like this mythical figure in their head. So, which again is kind of a catch-22. Like, I enjoy being a content creator and stuff, but I've learned from doing it so long just to be careful, be careful what I say, be careful how I say it, because, like, my word means a lot at the end of the day, and, like, if I don't say something exactly correctly, then it could come back and bite me later. So that's kind of, that's kind of the way it is, so, but, all right, well, go ahead, Tara.
No, I was just like, it's true, and we're all still learning and all sorts of stuff. We're still figuring out. I mean, they're still figuring out how to use the car. Did you realize, like, they're like, oh, the seatbelts and the airbags and stuff have actually injured a lot of women and children because we only had the men engineers making them. And they're like, yeah, it took you this long to realize that men tend to be a little bit bigger than women. So it kept injuring the women. There's still always progress to be made, and cars have been going around for 70 years, longer. So we're still in the middle of it, but it's good to keep having these conversations and learning from each other and getting these tips and all that stuff. So thank you so much, KP, for
yeah.
Come on.
Oh, yeah, thanks for coming on, like I said, pre-recording. having guests that are educated and fun to talk to and keep it professional is kind of all I can ask, because as, working with YouTubers and other people, you kind of, I'm not used to dealing with, like, professional is such a loose term when you're dealing with people on the internet, you just kind of don't know. So yeah, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts and especially, like, education and stuff. I thought that was fascinating to hear Parasocial.
Oh, good.
Yeah, from someone who actually studied it and not just, like, knows that term off the top of their head, so.
Well, because I was like, I used to watch Kim Possible. What does she want me to talk about? And you were like, I just wanted to talk about your background and all that. So I'm like, all right. I really wasn't sure. I was like, did you want me to watch Rick and Morty or something? I don't know. So,
well, you can ask me next time, all right? Like, if you're
yeah.
Like, I don't mind
next time. And we could dissect, Little Mermaid animation and live action. I don't know.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, but yeah, I just wanted, especially if for people that are continual people, it's always good to establish tone, because, like, like, the general audience doesn't know where I stole all these people from. Like, I've had my personal friends who have, like, little to no not professional, but just kind of experience in the online platform, and I have to kind of coax them through it. So I've kind of seen it all at this point. We're at 90 something, so we're close to 100 episodes of the podcast specifically. So it's an interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. I like having it as another platform, as an easier thing to get out that isn't just the content, because the content, I don't know if you've seen it, Tara, yourself, but the content's very meticulous because of how detailed it is. The high production values versus just, again, YouTubers that are just talking over still images. Like, that doesn't really take that long versus, like, using Premiere and After Effects and animating stuff, and it's a whole thing.
Well, I was watching some of the YouTube of the past guests, and they tended to be more about, like, some things particular in the world of animation or television or something like that. So I wasn't sure. And I was like, oh, I wonder what she's going to use for my voice. Like, who's going to... Can it be Angelina Jolie? Oh my God, that's so cool. Anyway.
Well, yeah, I gotcha. So this podcast is mostly just about fandom stuff. It's a range of just stuff that is fandom adjacent. So, it's a cartoon animation channel and I started doing My Little Pony stuff. So it's, like, just kind of general Western animation / also fandom, because I do conventions and that crosses over to fandom, and, like, the Kim Possible stuff and the pony stuff is fandom pretty heavy, especially the pony stuff. It has been Kim Possible. It's always kind of, as a fandom's always kind of had its ups and downs, like a little higher than normal, but not anything like My Little Pony, at least from what I remember. We weren't having Kim Possible conventions, so there was almost one Kim Possible convention, but it didn't happen. So, the bronies, I think, take advantage of the fact that they have conventions specifically for their IP, where most people have to go to normal conventions and, like, bigger conventions just to kind of be involved in fandom spaces in general. So, which is interesting on its own. So Tara, where can people find you on the internet if they want to look up your work?
Sure. I'm on most platforms at Tara_Jabbari. I have 2 podcasts. One is Who Was She podcast, which is about women throughout history. And then the other one I work on a lot is Media and Monuments, which is a podcast that talks to people who are screen-based professionals. I'm one of the co-hosts and one of the co-producers. We got the Gina Davis Institute on. I got interview Blockbuster.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Like Blockbuster, the guy, TM?
Well, no, the store manager of the last Blockbuster in the world.
Right.
She's so cool. Yeah. And I think it's Sandy Harding. I could be wrong.
Yeah, but that rings a name, or rings a bell. So.
She was really sweet. She let me talk to her. And totally geeked out. But we got to talk, we talked to editors, we talked to casting agents, location managers, anything in screen-based formats and also, and now we've been talking to influencers, particularly because of the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes. People can't really talk about it. And it was like, there's a new form of media, screen-based media. So we've been talking to influencers and so I really enjoy it. I always say I'd be a listener if I wasn't involved, because I would want to know, what does it mean to be a producer, and what does it mean to be a location manager or travel influencer, and so Media and Monuments. And then at Who Was She podcast is another one that was a passion project. And I talk about a woman's life. First season was on Lydia Zeminoff, second season was on Zainab, third season is about Hazel Summit, and I'm working on the fourth season. So these women had really inspiring lives, and so I decided to put it on a podcast format, and I think more people would benefit from learning them about their lives too.
Yeah, thanks for going through that. The dog was barking. I appreciate it.
No worries. I like dogs.
Yeah, he's a good dog. He's just a little noisy sometimes when I'm recording at the worst possible times, but it's okay. Dogs are so cool. So yeah, if this is your first time listening to Animation Communication, welcome to the craziness. Like I said, this is like going to be like 90 something, 91, 92. So we have a whole backlog if you're interested in fandom, animation, art, like professional people in the industry, in the animation field specifically. So that's kind of the focus. But we also have like convention and convention safety and like, all sorts of like stuff in that sphere too. So we're on all the platforms, including YouTube, because we have a YouTube channel, which, people can watch it, but we also are on iTunes and Spotify and all the places that people go to, the places and the things. So, it's fun. I like it here. So, but yeah, I think I don't really have any other further announcements besides that for the class. Just join the Discord server. It's neat. I like it. We worked hard on it to have like games and movies pretty much every night at this point. So if you like make good friends and it's not just about hanging out with me and only me, then it's safe for minors too. So I think the terms of service for Discord are 13 plus. So, but again, parents, make sure your kids aren't doing anything weird on the internet, please. I can't control your children. Don't send them to me. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening to this episode. See you next time, or see you in the past. And thanks for listening to us talk about nerd stuff, essentially parasocial and like psychology and fun things. Yeah. So, all right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to Animation Communication on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting provider. We are really hoping the show makes a difference in how people view animation, as well as media as a whole, as well as giving and providing advice for people all over the world who like and want to join the animation and media industry. If you like what you heard, please remember to show support by giving a like, a follow, rating those 5 stars, as well as subscribing to our main I Love Kim Possible a Lot channel on YouTube, and turn your notifications on. New episodes of Animation Communication come out every Wednesday at 6 a.m. EST on podcasting platforms and 4 p.m. EST on YouTube. You can follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at the KP Podcast for information on upcoming guest episodes and more, as well as our hosts KP and Lyle Convoy at I Love KP a Lot and at Lyle Manbad on social media. I'm Lucy, and thank you for being a part of our community. See you next time on Animation Communication.